Lanterns on the Levee, Recollections of a Planter's Son by William Alexander Percy. The Delta. My country is the Mississippi Delta, the river country. It lies flat like a badly drawn half oval, with Memphis at its northern and Vicksburg at its southern tip. Its western boundary is the Mississippi River, which coils and returns on itself in great loops and crescents. Though from the map you would think it ran in a straight line north and south. Every few years it rises like a monster from its bed and pushes over its banks to vex and sweeten the land it has made. For our soil, very dark brown, creamy and sweet smelling, without substrata of rock or shell, was built up slowly, century after century, by the sediment gathered by the river in its solemn task of cleansing the continent and deposited in annual layers of silt on what must have been the vast depression between itself and the hills. This ancient depression, now filled in and level, is what we call the Delta. Some say it was the floor of the sea itself. Now it seems to still be a floor, being smooth from one end to the other, without rise or dip or hill, unless the mysterious scattered monuments of the mound builders may be called hills. The land does not drain into the river as most riparian lands do, but tilts back from it towards the hills of the south and east. Across this wide, flat, alluvial stretch, north and south it measures 196 miles. East and west, at the widest point, 50 miles. Run slowly and circuitously other rivers and creeks, also high-banked, with names pleasant to remember: Rattlesnake Bayou, Quiver River, the Bogfalia, the Tallahatchie, the Sunflower, pouring their tawny waters finally into the Yazoo, which in turn loses itself just above Vicksburg in the river. With us, when you speak of the river, though there are many, you mean always the same one, the great river, the shifting, unappeasable god of the country, feared and loved, the Mississippi. In the old days, this was a land of unbroken forest. All trees grew there except the pine and its kindred, and strangely enough, the magnolia. The water oak, the pecan, the cypress, and the sweet gum were perhaps the most beautiful and home-loving, but there was ash and elm, walnut and maple, and many others besides. They grew to enormous heights with vast trunks and limbs, and between them spread a chaos of vines and cane and brush, so that the deer and bear took it for their own, and only by the Indians was it penetrable, and by them only on rice of trails. Wildflowers were few, the soil being too rich and warm and deep, and those, like the yellow top of early spring, apt to be rank and weed-like. A still country it must have been then, ankle-deep in water, mostly in shadow, with mere flickers of sunshine, and they motley and yellow, thick like syrup. The wild swans loved it. Tides of green parakeets from the south and of gray pigeons from the north melted into treetops and gave them sound. Ducks, mallard, canvasback, teal, and wood duck, and Canadian geese, their wedges high in the soft air of autumn, like winter's first arrows, have still not deserted it. Such was my country hardly more than 100 years ago. It was about then that slavery became unprofitable in the older southern states, and slaveholders began to look for cheap, fertile lands farther west that could feed the many black mouths dependent on them. So younger sons from Virginia, South Carolina, and Kentucky, with their gear, livestock, and chattels, human and otherwise, started a leisurely migration into the Delta. Forests were cleared, roads constructed, such dusty or muddy roads, soil shaped into fields, home built. They settled first on the banks and bends of the river, later on the banks and bends of the smaller streams, for those were high ground over which then yearly inundations of the river, as yet uncurbed by levees, never quite reached. There is still a great curve of the shoreline called Kentucky Bend, and another, mostly sandbar now, called Carolina. The roads they built were local affairs, connecting plantation with plantation or with hamlets which grew slowly and without booms into our present small towns. In wet weather, of which we have much, they were bottomless, and old-timers believe they could never be anything else. The real highway was the river. All life, social and economic, centered there. The river steamers furnished transportation, relaxation, and information to the whole river people. In our town, the Pargo landed regularly on Sunday, usually between 11 and about noon. Everybody would be at church, but when she blew, the male members of the congregation to a man would rise and, in spite of indignant glares from their wives and giggles from the choir, make their exits, with a severe air of business just remembered. With the Pargo came the week's mail and gossip of the riverfront from St. Louis to New Orleans, and rumors from the very distant outside world. If the occasion was propitious, a little round of poker might be started, and a few toddies drunk. They were a fine fleet, those old side-wheelers which plied between St. Louis and New Orleans, and stopped on signal at the various plantations and river settlements, the White, the Pargo, the Natchez, the Robert E. Lee. The last and least of them was the Belle of the Bends, which as a small boy I could never see steaming majestically through the sunset to the landing without a fine, choky feeling. They had pleasant outside cabins opening on an enormous white dining salon, decorated in the most abandoned gingerbread style, which after supper became a ballroom. Almost as comfortable as our ocean liners of today, they were far easier and more sociable. Anybody who was anybody knew everybody else, and each trip was rather like a grand house party with dancing and gambling and an abundance of Kentucky whiskey and French champagne. The ladies, who never partook of these beverages, maybe a sip of champagne, were always going to New Orleans for Mardi Gras or to shop or hear the opera, well established there before it was begun in New York, or to visit cousins and aunts in the Louisiana and Natchez territory. And as those days of enormous families, cousins and aunts were plentiful. There never was a Southern family that was a Southern family, some member of which, incredibly beautiful and sparkling, had not opened the ball with Lafayette. For years, apparently, his sole occupation was opening balls in New Orleans, Charleston, Natchez, and St. Louis. After looking at 100 or more badly painted portraits of these belles, I am a firm believer in this tradition. If the ladies loved going to New Orleans, the men folks were never at a loss for reasons to take the same trip. Memphis was hardly more than a country town. The commission merchants, forerunners of the modern bank, cooperative association, federal land bank, insurance company with funds to invest, had their offices in New Orleans, and it was they who supplied the planners with the cash for their extensive and costly operations. Here was an ever-ready reason to board the boat going south, and one that made unnecessary any reference to the lottery, the races, the masked balls, the fantastic poker games, the 101 amiable vices of that most European and slow-eyed of American cities.